Hi guys, how are you all doing? Welcome to the fourth episode of Morning Chai and Ikigai. This is your podcast host Priyanka. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about a children's story. Now, just because it is a story that was written for children doesn't mean that we adults are not meant to read it. In fact, most of life's important lessons can be found in children's literature. Take, for example, Bill Watterson's Calvin and Hobbes, or A. Milner's Winnie the Pooh, or our favorite Dr. Seuss, or even J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter for that matter. These books are often packed with nuggets of wisdom that we as adults can apply to our daily lives. And the ironical part is, by the time we adults realize the importance of these children's books, we are no longer children. Anyway, coming back to the topic, today's story is one with a very impactful and a very poignant message. A message that we need to constantly keep reminding ourselves of. And if you have children, of course, you need to emphasize the importance of this message while they are growing up. So, the story is titled The Velveteen Rabbit and is authored by Marjorie Williams. A little about the author. Marjorie Williams was the younger of two sisters and she was born in London. Now, even as a child, Marjorie was known to have this vivid imagination. So much so that she'd create personalities for the toys in her nursery, and she would weave stories around them. So this creative streak was first observed by her father, who was a kind and supportive man, and he not just encouraged her, but he also supported this creativity by motivating her. He motivated her to read more and to express better, and this in a way it formed the crux of this father daughter relationship. So when Marjorie was faced with the grief of his sudden death, she was barely a child at that time. She was hardly 7, and she was distraught. It was like a major setback to her. Um, 2 years later, the family had to shift to New York City. So it is said that Marjorie never really got over this grief of losing a parent in such a drastic way, and this is reflected in the stories that she wrote all through her life. They say that her stories always had this element of hidden grief, of sadness, of wistfulness. And this kind of stemmed from that traumatic episode of her father's death. Now, this did not go down well with her readers all the time. There were people who noted somber tones in her writing, and some of them had a problem with that. But Marjorie ignored all that and continued to write. So Marjorie Williams, she had become a published author at the age of 19, which was a very young age, especially for a woman back then to be published. But life had this weird way of intervening. She fell in love and she got married, and motherhood demanded that she take a break from writing. So writing, in a sense, was relegated to the back burner. And it was only when her children grew older that she thought of writing once again. It is said that the inspiration for the Velveteen Rabbit and other stories came from the fact that she was observing her kids at play, and that was when she noted the toys strewn across the floor, and that was when inspiration struck, and she thought that she would convert it into a story. That was how the Velveteen Rabbit came into being. Of course, during her lifetime, she wrote other stories and other novels. She wrote more than 25 novels and stories. But The Velveteen Rabbit continues to be the most popular and the most loved amongst all her books and across all ages, even today. What is real? Asked the rabbit one day. when they were lying side by side near the nursery fender before Nana came to tidy the room. Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and a stick out handle? Real isn't how you're made, said the skin horse. It's a thing that happens to you when a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you. Then you become real. Does it hurt? Asked the rabbit. Sometimes, said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. When you are real, you don't mind being hurt. Does it happen all at once, like being wound up? He asked. Or bit by bit? It doesn't happen all at once, said the skin horse. You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily, or have sharp edges, or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you're real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints, and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you're real, you can't be ugly. Except to people who don't understand. The Velveteen Rabbit is freely available on the internet, but let me tell you briefly about it so that you can gain some perspective. So, the Velveteen Rabbit is about a toy rabbit that is made of satin. It is a fat and a bunchy rabbit that has buttons for eyes, and it has a bushy tail and pink satin ears, and it's stuffed with sawdust. So this rabbit is gifted to a young boy as a Christmas present, and that is where the story begins. So after being attracted to the rabbit for a brief time, the boy turns to his other gifts, which are far more exciting, and the Velveteen Rabbit gets relegated to the cupboard in the nursery. Now it is here that the Velveteen Rabbit feels very ignored, and he feels lonely because all the other toys in comparison are much more advanced and modern than him. He's just made of sawdust and satin, whereas the others they are made of they can be wound up and they're mechanical, and so the Velveteen Rabbit feels very inferior compared to them. Also, it doesn't help that the other toys they belittle him. They are haughty, and they think they are above him, all except the skin horse. Now, the skin horse is a toy that belonged to the young boy's uncle during his childhood. And the skin horse is now old and tattered, but it offers some real sane advice. Now, the excerpt I had read earlier was a conversation between the Velveteen Rabbit and the skin horse, wherein they talk about what being real feels like. And the skin horse offers him some words of wisdom. But the Velveteen Rabbit is always sad that he does not know what being real is like, and he wonders what it must feel like to be real. And then one day, the boy's attention steers towards the Velveteen Rabbit. And from that day onwards, the two almost become inseparable. The boy carries him everywhere he goes, to the garden patch, he carries him to bed at night. And that is when the Velveteen Rabbit realizes what the skin horse had been telling him. So he is convinced now that the boy likes him. And of course, the boy believes, like all children his age, he believes that the rabbit is real, just like Calvin believes that Hobbes is real and is not a stuffed tiger. Similarly, the boy in this story believes that his Velveteen Rabbit is real, and that is enough for the Velveteen Rabbit to be convinced, to have the conviction and the confidence that he is indeed real, because he feels loved. He does not notice how his fur is becoming shabbier day by day due to the constant handling by the boy. His tail is becoming almost unsewn, and the pink is of his nose is being rubbed off, because that is where the boy kisses him goodnight. But he ignores all these facts because he feels loved. Things, however, are not meant to last for the Velveteen Rabbit. So, in a sudden twist of events, the boy gets affected by scarlet fever, and the doctor advises that all the picture books and all the toys in the nursery be burned down, and this includes the Velveteen Rabbit as well. Now, of course, the end of the story has a little bit of nursery magic, which I wouldn't want to give away because I want you all to read the story for yourself and enjoy it. And I promise you, the end will leave you all smiling. But coming to the next segment of this episode, what is the message behind the Velveteen Rabbit? Lesson number 1: looks do not matter and appearances are deceptive. Now, at the very beginning of the story, the Velveteen Rabbit is introduced to us as this fat and bunchy rabbit that is stuffed with sawdust. Now, this means that the author wants to portray the rabbit as pretty much a plain Jane of the toy kingdom. Of course, the definition and the interpretation of beauty has changed over the ages, and now we no longer consider fat as ugly. But at that point of time, fat and bunchy probably had a negative connotation to it. So Marjorie Williams probably wanted to emphasize on how love looks beyond beauty or beyond the physical appearance of the person. So, like in the story, the boy does not mind the rabbit being just made of cloth and a stuffed toy, and still chooses the Velveteen Rabbit above all the other toys. He to a point where they both become inseparable, and then even when the rabbit becomes old and worn out and shabby, the boy still prefers him over the other toys and wants him to be with him throughout. So Marjorie Williams wants to emphasize that beauty means nothing when it comes to love. So love looks beyond that. Now, at this point, I would like to read out a line from the story, which helps me go smoothly to the next point that I'm trying to make. So the line goes like this. Now, this is in reference to the skin horse, and it says, "He," that is the skin horse, "he was wise, for he had seen a long succession of mechanical toys arrive to boast and swagger and break their mainsprings and pass away. And he knew they were only toys and would never turn into anything else." So this line just goes to show the wisdom that the skin horse has. And that brings me to the second point the story wants to emphasize. That is lesson number 2, bullying. So there are two instances of bullying in the story. One is when the Velveteen Rabbit feels very inferior because the other toys in the nursery belittle him. That the mechanical toys think they are far more superior. So this is an instance of bullying that Marjorie wanted to point out probably, and that line which I just read out was with reference to this incident. So the skin horse knows that these toys, they are just they are, in the grand scheme of things, they don't matter because they are never going to change into anything else. They are just going to remain toys. And then the second instance of bullying is when the Velveteen Rabbit meets the real rabbits in the woods, and they belittle him because he smells different from them, and because he doesn't have hind legs. And at this point, the Velveteen Rabbit is sad, but he defends himself. Now the two instances of bullying, we can see a stark difference between the reaction and the response given by the Velveteen Rabbit. In the first instance, when the Velveteen Rabbit is bullied by the toys in the nursery, he kind of shrivels up and he kind of feels dejected and desolate. And the second instance is after the boy, after the Velveteen Rabbit is convinced that the boy loves him, he has gained this new self-confidence, by virtue of which he can face this bullying. So when the real rabbits try to belittle him and say that he smells different and he's not like them and he doesn't have hind feet. So the Velveteen Rabbit at that point, he stands up for himself. He says, no, I am real. So this just goes to show the power of love and what it does to us. It increases our self-confidence. It convinces us that we are real. So, the power of love lies in the fact that it not just increases our self esteem, but also makes us believe in ourselves more than anything else. So, the Velveteen Rabbit stresses on this fact. Now, at this point, I cannot help but wish that the author had stressed on the importance of self love as well, because that is equally important. But but the story is more about unconditional love, the unconditional love that the Velveteen Rabbit offers to the boy for making him believe in himself, for convincing him that he too is real. So, coming to the next point, the fourth lesson that we learn from the story is from the skin horse, and that is another important lesson. The skin horse teaches us that we gotta be kind to everyone we meet along the way. Lesson number 5, and this to me is the most touching part of the story. So, towards the end of the story, when the rabbit realizes that the boy is bedridden because of scarlet fever, he waits it out patiently, all the while dreaming about how things will be when the boy finally recovers. And when the boy is on his way to recovery and plans a day on the beach, the Velveteen Rabbit is looking forward to it. He thinks of all the things that he will do on the beach, things that he wants to see, and he's so excited to go to the beach with the boy. And even when the boy forgets all about him on recovering, he does not mind it. Now, this to me is a very touching scene because this is not the normal response that we people tend to give when faced with rejection. He does not stomp his feet or get angry or get mad at the boy. He just loves him unconditionally. And perhaps that's where you remember the skin horse. And what he said about love, that love hurts, but you don't mind it. So the author probably here wants to tell us that when you love someone unconditionally, you take along with it the risk of being hurt. You give the person the power to hurt you, and sometimes the person does hurt you, but you love the person all the same. Last but not the least, the sixth lesson the Velveteen Rabbit leaves us with. Now, this lesson is the end of the story, which I would want you guys to read for yourself. So, without divulging the way the story concludes, I will just summarize the lesson. And it goes to say that love always returns. Maybe not in the same way you lost it, but it does return. Now, this lesson reminds me of a similar quote from Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix that J.K. Rowling had used. I think it had something to do with things we lose finding their way back to us, but not necessarily in the way we expect them to. Now, this truth is depicted beautifully in this story, The Velveteen Rabbit. And I would suggest you read the story out to your kids to explain to them the importance of kindness, to explain to them the importance of love. Now, and don't forget to tell them about these nuances, because this story will not just help them cope better with the stresses that growing up will bring to them, but it will also help them face life in a better way. And not just children, but we too, as adults, every now and then need to be reminded about these things. So that brings me to the end of today's episode of Morning Chai and Ikigai. Don't forget to tune in on Sunday for a brand new episode. Until then, this is your host Priyanka signing out. Bye-bye. Morning Chai and Ikigai is a bi-weekly podcast. That means fresh episodes will be uploaded every Thursday and Sunday. If you want to connect with me outside the pod, I am there on Twitter and Instagram. My handle is Dr. Priyanka Naik, that is Dr. Priyanka Naik. I'm also there on Facebook, and my YouTube channel is Dr. Priyanka Naik again. So do subscribe, leave me a comment, or rate and review my podcast. I also blog at drpriyankanaik.com.